The wind carried a chill that September evening in 2002, rustling the amber leaves along Cedar Lane in Mason, Iowa. It was the kind of small town where everyone knew your name, your parents' names, and even the pets you had as a child. But that sense of safety was shattered when 17-year-old Caroline Mitchell disappeared without a trace. It began like any ordinary autumn evening. Caroline had been finishing homework at her family's modest farmhouse on the outskirts of town. Her younger brother, Jacob, remembered the last time he saw her. She was laughing as she tied her worn sneakers, the late sunlight catching the edges of her honey-blonde hair. She kissed her mother on the cheek and promised she'd be back by dinner. By 6:45 p.m., Caroline was supposed to return from walking to the local library to return a book and pick up supplies for a school project. Her route was familiar, lined with white picket fences, cornfields, and the occasional neighbor waving from their porch. Yet that day, Caroline never arrived home. The Mitchells' initial worry turned to panic as the sun dipped behind the rolling hills, shadows stretching unnaturally across the quiet streets. Jacob called her name from the yard, his voice cracking against the settling darkness, but there was no answer. By 7:30 p.m., Caroline's mother, Laura Mitchell, dialed the Mason Police Department. Officer Henry Grayson, a familiar face to the Mitchells, arrived within minutes. The initial investigation was routine: interview neighbors, check local roads, and canvass the area. Yet every familiar path Caroline might have taken led to dead ends. Her backpack was never recovered, nor any personal belongings that might hint at her fate. It was as though she had vanished into thin air. For the next several days, Mason became a town on edge. Volunteers scoured fields and wooded patches surrounding the Mitchell residence. Search dogs picked up her scent near the library, trailing faintly to the edge of Cedar Lane before the trail abruptly stopped. Residents whispered theories, some plausible, some outlandish, but the truth remained elusive. Caroline Mitchell had been a bright, caring teenager, known for her generosity and quiet determination. Her school friends remembered her as someone who could light up any room and always noticed when someone needed a friend. Weeks turned into months and months into years. Caroline's disappearance became a ghost that haunted Mason, a constant, silent presence at town gatherings, library visits, and in the empty chair she once occupied in the school auditorium. Police files grew thick with witness statements and unverified tips, yet no arrests were made. The case was officially classified as a missing person investigation, but with every passing year, hope waned. Then in late 2019, 17 years after Caroline vanished, a breakthrough came from an unexpected source: a discarded cigarette butt. At first glance, it seemed trivial, perhaps even absurd, but forensic science had advanced in ways unimaginable back in 2002. The Iowa State Police Cold Case Unit, established with federal funding to review long unsolved cases, had begun revisiting old evidence. Detective Margaret "Maggie" Sanders, the unit's lead investigator, had her attention drawn to Caroline's file immediately. Among the carefully preserved items was a cigarette butt found near the route Caroline was last seen taking, a detail that had gone untested for almost 2 decades. Using cutting-edge DNA extraction techniques, Sanders' team was able to pull a complete genetic profile from the small sample. When the results came back, they were astonishing. The DNA belonged to a man named Brandon Whitmore, a 41-year-old who had grown up in Mason and maintained a low profile in town. Whitmore had no prior criminal record, and by all accounts was considered a model citizen. He ran a small auto repair shop, coached youth soccer, and attended church every Sunday. The revelation sent shockwaves through the community. How could someone so embedded in the life of Mason be connected to a crime that had tormented the town for nearly 2 decades? Detectives acted carefully. They began discreet surveillance, collecting corroborating evidence and reviewing past witness statements. In doing so, they uncovered details that had been overlooked in 2002. Multiple neighbors recalled seeing a man matching Whitmore's description loitering near Cedar Lane the night Caroline disappeared. One elderly resident, Mrs. Eleanor Green, remembered hearing a young girl's distressed voice and the squeal of tires around 7 p.m., though she had dismissed it at the time, assuming it was a quarrel between teenagers. Another witness, who had been too frightened to come forward previously, described seeing Whitmore's pickup truck parked unusually close to the library entrance on the evening Caroline vanished. The pattern began to emerge. The evidence, once scattered and inconclusive, was now aligning. The cigarette butt, the eyewitness accounts, the timeline inconsistencies, all pointed toward Whitmore. Detective Sanders, however, knew that establishing guilt required more than suspicion. It required a carefully constructed timeline and irrefutable evidence. The team combed through old case files, cross-referencing the original interviews, library records, and traffic camera footage. Yes, even though digital surveillance was minimal in 2002, a handful of grainy security tapes from nearby businesses provided crucial contextual clues. By early 2020, the investigation reached a tipping point. Whitmore was brought in for questioning under controlled conditions. At first, he denied any involvement, his demeanor calm, almost rehearsed. But forensic genetic genealogy had done its work. The DNA evidence placed him at the scene, undeniably linking him to the cigarette butt near Cedar Lane. As the questioning intensified, cracks appeared in his composure. He had not anticipated that investigators would connect the dots between the discarded cigarette, his daily habits, and long-forgotten witness accounts. The revelation was catastrophic for Mason. Residents who had once casually waved at Whitmore, purchased auto repairs from him, or cheered on his coaching efforts now recoiled in disbelief. The man who seemed ordinary, even benevolent, had been hiding a secret that had haunted their community for nearly 20 years. Stories emerged of Whitmore's strange behavior over the years, small, almost imperceptible actions that, in retrospect, were deeply unsettling. Neighbors remembered his unusual curiosity about children's routines, his insistence on being involved in every town safety initiative, and his frequent, coincidental appearances near community events tied to Caroline's disappearance. Detective Sanders faced another challenge, connecting the DNA evidence to the timeline of events in 2002. By meticulously reconstructing Whitmore's movements through pay stubs, church attendance logs, and interviews with acquaintances, investigators confirmed that he had the opportunity to abduct Caroline. The breakthrough allowed prosecutors to secure a warrant for his arrest, a move that reverberated through Mason as law enforcement prepared to confront the man who had eluded suspicion for so long. Meanwhile, Caroline's family, who had endured years of pain, received the news with a mix of hope and fear. Her mother, Laura, now in her early 50s, described feeling a weight lifted from decades of torment, yet also bracing for the confrontation with the man responsible for her daughter's disappearance. Jacob, now a young adult, wrestled with anger, grief, and disbelief, questioning how the town's collective trust could have been so thoroughly betrayed. The arrest of Brandon Whitmore in mid-2020 was swift but tense. Officers documented the moment he was taken into custody. A man who had quietly maintained the illusion of normalcy, suddenly exposed as a predator who had preyed on a teenager in broad daylight. Whitmore's initial courtroom appearances were marked by attempts to portray himself as an ordinary citizen, but the evidence against him was overwhelming. DNA, corroborated witness testimony, and meticulous investigative reconstruction left little room for doubt. As the legal process unfolded, Mason became a town divided between the relief of answers finally emerging and the lingering shock that a trusted community member had caused such devastation. The trial revealed horrifying details about Whitmore's behavior and the meticulous planning he had undertaken to avoid detection. Yet, amidst the despair, there was a glimmer of justice. Caroline's family would finally know the truth, and a town that had been haunted for nearly 2 decades could begin the slow process of healing. In the months following the arrest, Mason's community rallied around Caroline's memory. A scholarship was established in her name, honoring her passion for learning and the vibrant spirit she had embodied. Town meetings focused on improving child safety, community awareness, and supporting families impacted by crime. While nothing could undo the trauma, the resolution of Caroline's case became a symbol of perseverance, modern forensic science, and the tenacity of investigators committed to justice, no matter how many years had passed. The first time Laura Mitchell saw Brandon Whitmore in custody, her chest tightened as if decades of grief had settled there all at once. For 17 years, she had imagined 1,000 possible explanations for Caroline's disappearance, yet none had prepared her for the sight of the man who had lived so openly among them, now exposed as the source of her family's heartbreak. He sat in the interrogation room, hands clasped, calm on the surface but shadows of guilt flickering behind his eyes. Detective Maggie Sanders entered, evidence folder in hand. She had spent months piecing together the fragments of 2002, combining modern DNA breakthroughs with old witness accounts. The cigarette butt, once dismissed as trivial, had become the linchpin in a case that had haunted Mason for nearly 2 decades. Sanders knew that connecting the past to the present required patience, empathy, and an unwavering focus on the victim. Caroline's story had to be told, not just as a name in a file, but as a living, breathing person whose life had been stolen. Whitmore's calm demeanor began to crack as Sanders laid out the timeline. "We have your DNA placed at the scene of Caroline Mitchell's disappearance," she said. "We have witness statements, vehicle sightings, and your movements reconstructed from 2002. The evidence is overwhelming. It's time to tell the truth." For a long moment, silence hung in the room. Then, in a voice low and measured, Whitmore began to speak. "I didn't mean for her to vanish. I didn't plan it," he murmured, eyes darting toward the floor. The confession that followed was chilling. He described approaching Caroline near the library, pretending to offer guidance on her school project. He claimed that she initially ignored him, but that his anger escalated. Every detail was methodical, each sentence revealing a man who had spent 17 years mastering the art of concealment. Outside the interrogation room, Mason seemed suspended in time. News of the confession leaked slowly, first through whispers in grocery stores and gas stations, then through the town's online forums. People who had waved at Whitmore, chatted with him at church socials, or trusted him with their children's soccer teams now felt a raw, almost physical sense of betrayal. How could someone so ordinary, so woven into the fabric of their lives, have been capable of such cruelty? Meanwhile, Sanders and her team began reviewing overlooked evidence from 2002. A grainy photograph from the library security camera, dismissed at the time, now revealed Whitmore loitering near the return desk just as Caroline entered. Small details, like a misplaced coffee cup on a library table and faint tire impressions near the curb, suddenly took on new meaning. Forensic analysts were able to match soil particles from his truck bed to the fields adjacent to Cedar Lane, tying him directly to the scene where Caroline had vanished. Every overlooked piece of evidence now formed a mosaic of guilt. Caroline's younger brother, Jacob, struggled with the flood of emotions. Memories long buried resurfaced. The way Caroline had corrected his grammar while laughing, the way she had insisted on making pumpkin bread for the entire neighborhood during Halloween, the nights they had stayed up talking about dreams of college and adventure. Now, each recollection was tinged with horror. Jacob sat with his mother in the quiet of their living room, the autumn leaves rustling outside, and finally allowed himself to cry, a release he had denied himself for years. The confession led to a series of searches and the discovery of previously unknown evidence. Whitmore had maintained a meticulous log of Caroline's routine, stored in a hidden compartment in his workshop. His journals detailed her school schedule, the exact time she walked home, even the books she borrowed from the library. Detectives described the journals as a blueprint for obsession, a chilling confirmation of premeditation that explained how he had avoided suspicion for so long. The community began grappling with the implications. People who had trusted Whitmore implicitly felt a collective shockwave. Neighbors questioned their own instincts, wondering if they had missed warning signs that now seemed obvious in retrospect. His public persona, a friendly mechanic, a devoted youth coach, a church volunteer, had been a mask hiding a predator. Local journalist Emily Carter captured the town's disillusionment in a front-page feature. "The man we knew is not the man who took Caroline," she wrote. "Our small town, our safety, our innocence, shattered in the quietest, cruelest way." The trial preparations were meticulous. Prosecutors gathered every piece of evidence, digital and physical, to construct a narrative that would withstand scrutiny. Defense attorneys attempted to frame Whitmore as a disturbed but misunderstood man, yet the evidence, DNA, confessions, eyewitness accounts, was unassailable. The community watched as history, long dormant, began to move forward. During pretrial hearings, revelations continued to emerge. Friends of Whitmore recounted odd behaviors over the years, the way he had kept tabs on Caroline's parents during community events, or how he had occasionally been seen loitering near the library hours after the girl's disappearance. What had once seemed inconsequential now fit into a pattern of obsession and manipulation. Witnesses described feeling uneasy, but social norms and Whitmore's standing in the town had silenced them. The realization that fear, shame, and respect for authority had delayed justice added another layer of complexity to the case. The trial itself was an emotional spectacle. Courtrooms in Mason were packed beyond capacity, with overflow rooms streaming proceedings to the public. Caroline's mother, Laura, attended every session, her hands clasped tightly, knuckles white, yet determined to hear every detail. The prosecutor, Sarah Whitfield, presented a meticulously constructed timeline, highlighting every movement of Whitmore and correlating it with Caroline's disappearance. Each piece of evidence, every witness statement, photograph, soil sample, and DNA match, was laid bare for the jury. Perhaps the most heart-wrenching moment came when the jury was shown Caroline's diary, preserved for 17 years. In her careful handwriting, she had documented her dreams, her fears, and the minutiae of teenage life. Plans for college, notes about friends, and small observations that now seemed hauntingly prescient. Reading her words aloud, Laura Mitchell wept openly, while Jacob clutched a photograph of his sister, frozen in mid-laugh, wishing he could speak to her one last time. Whitmore's demeanor shifted during the trial. The calm, collected persona he had maintained for years faltered as prosecutors presented incontrovertible evidence. In cross-examinations, his attempts at deflection failed, exposing inconsistencies and contradictions. Witnesses recounted events from 2002 with clarity sharpened by years of reflection, their voices steady as they recounted interactions that had seemed trivial at the time but were now vital pieces of the puzzle. As the trial progressed, the town of Mason faced its own reckoning. Parents who had once allowed their children to play freely on Cedar Lane now walked the streets with vigilance. Residents who had casually greeted Whitmore in church pews or at community gatherings felt a profound sense of betrayal. Community leaders organized support groups, counseling sessions, and public forums to help residents process the trauma, illustrating the long-lasting ripple effects of such crimes in small towns where trust runs deep. Outside the courtroom, Caroline's story began to inspire broader conversations about forensic science and cold cases. The use of DNA from a seemingly trivial cigarette butt had cracked open a case that had seemed unsolvable. Detective Sanders spoke at conferences and workshops, emphasizing the importance of preserving evidence, even when cases appear dormant. She stressed that every discarded item, every overlooked detail, could hold the key to justice. Her work and the breakthrough in Caroline's case became a blueprint for solving cold cases nationwide, inspiring new approaches to long-forgotten investigations. Then came the emotional crescendo of the trial, the day the jury reached a verdict. The courtroom was tense, the air thick with anticipation. When the foreperson stood and read the words, "Guilty on all counts," a collective release rippled through the room. Caroline's family finally exhaled a breath they had been holding for 17 years. Tears, hugs, and whispered prayers filled the courtroom as the gravity of justice delivered sank in. Whitmore was sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. His attempts at appeals and deflection were met with strict judicial responses. The sentence represented not only justice for Caroline, but also a reaffirmation of the community's moral fabric, an acknowledgement that truth, patience, and meticulous investigation could prevail even after nearly 2 decades. In the aftermath, Mason began to heal. The Cedar Lane neighborhood held a memorial in Caroline's honor, with trees planted along the route she had walked so many years ago. A scholarship fund in her name was established, aimed at supporting young women pursuing education in the sciences and arts. These initiatives became symbols of resilience, illustrating that while evil can disrupt and devastate, communities can rebuild and honor the memory of victims through action and remembrance. Detective Sanders reflected on the case years later. She emphasized the human element behind every cold case, the pain of families, the perseverance of investigators, and the eventual triumph of justice. Caroline Mitchell's story, once a haunting mystery, had become a testament to persistence, modern forensic technology, and the courage of those unwilling to let time erase the truth. Yet even in closure, the emotional imprint remained. Residents of Mason, though relieved, continued to grapple with the betrayal of trust. Children who once played under Whitmore's guidance now grew up with lessons learned early about vigilance and discernment. Parents remained wary, aware that appearances can deceive and that evil can exist in plain sight. Caroline's life, though tragically cut short, became a beacon for change, education, and justice. Her family's advocacy, the community's resilience, and the meticulous work of law enforcement converged to ensure that her story would not be forgotten. And in Mason, as autumn leaves fell once again along Cedar Lane, the memory of Caroline Mitchell endured, not as a cautionary tale alone, but as a symbol of truth finally revealed 17 years after it was hidden in shadows. The first days after the verdict were surreal for the Mitchell family. Caroline's mother, Laura, walked slowly through her home, touching objects that had been hers for years, as though each one connected her to memories of a daughter she had almost lost entirely to time and silence. Jacob followed, quieter than usual, carrying Caroline's favorite journal, which had been returned to them after trial proceedings. It smelled faintly of old paper and ink, a smell that somehow made her absence tangible, yet comforting, as if Caroline's presence lingered in every page. The town of Mason began to stir with conversations long suppressed. Neighbors who had once nodded politely to Brandon Whitmore, unaware of the darkness behind his calm demeanor, now exchanged cautious glances. Parents whispered about the importance of vigilance, sharing their own stories of encounters and small, uneasy moments from 2002 that they had dismissed. These confessions were bittersweet, offering community catharsis while reminding everyone that evil can hide behind ordinary appearances. Detective Maggie Sanders remained at the center of the aftermath. For her, the case was a bittersweet victory. She had solved one of the most complex cold cases of her career, but she could not erase the years of fear and grief endured by Caroline's family. She organized a private memorial for investigators who had worked on the case since 2002, including retired officers who had kept the file alive through sheer determination. The memorial served as a reminder that justice sometimes requires decades of patience and unwavering dedication. Meanwhile, Brandon Whitmore's prison transfer was meticulous. Security protocols were tight. The town wanted to avoid any opportunity for public spectacle or harassment. Yet, the emotional weight of his imprisonment was impossible to ignore. He had once been a familiar face at community gatherings, now reduced to a cautionary tale of deception, obsession, and premeditation. Psychologists and prison officials who evaluated him described a man who remained outwardly calm, yet internally haunted by the inevitability of exposure and punishment. As autumn settled over Mason, the Mitchell family attended the first community-organized memorial for Caroline. It was a quiet affair, held at the local library, where Caroline had spent countless afternoons lost in books. Trees were planted in her memory, each representing a year she would have lived. Children placed small hand-painted stones around the saplings, each inscribed with messages of hope, remembrance, and justice finally served. Laura stood in the center, holding Jacob's hand, feeling a mixture of grief, relief, and an almost overwhelming sense of closure. Letters began arriving from around the country. Strangers, inspired by the story of Caroline's case, shared their own experiences, some of which involved unsolved disappearances, while others detailed how the use of DNA and careful investigation had brought long-awaited justice. These letters strengthened the community's resolve and brought a sense of connection beyond Mason, reminding the Mitchells and their neighbors that their personal tragedy resonated on a much larger scale. Detective Sanders and her team continued their work, now using the insights gained from the Whitmore case to help other cold cases. They analyzed the methodology, identifying patterns of concealment, manipulation, and premeditation that could inform active investigations elsewhere. Their work sparked collaboration between small-town departments and larger forensic laboratories, accelerating breakthroughs in previously stagnant cases. The cigarette butt that had once seemed trivial now served as a symbol of hope and diligence in law enforcement. Public reaction remained intense. Local news stations ran follow-up segments, highlighting the painstaking work that led to Whitmore's capture and the trial's emotional proceedings. Interviews with Laura and Jacob conveyed the personal side of justice, helping the audience understand the human stakes behind forensic breakthroughs. Schools organized programs on safety, awareness, and community responsibility, integrating Caroline's story into lessons that would shape young minds for years to come. However, healing was neither immediate nor uniform. Laura found herself haunted by memories that would not fade. Sleep was occasionally elusive, and the quiet moments at home brought waves of grief. Jacob, too, wrestled with mixed emotions, relief that justice had been served, anger at the betrayal, and sorrow for a sister he had lost at 16. They sought therapy together, and eventually joined support groups for families of victims, finding solidarity in shared experiences and understanding that their pain, though personal, was not isolated. Community members also faced difficult truths. Some neighbors felt guilt for not recognizing the warning signs, while others struggled to reconcile the public persona of Whitmore with the crimes he had committed. Counseling services, community meetings, and educational programs were established to help residents process the psychological impact of living alongside someone who had betrayed trust so fundamentally. The case became a study not only in criminal justice, but also in the social dynamics of trust, deception, and the ripple effects of trauma in tight-knit communities. Whitmore himself became a subject of study in criminal psychology circles. Analysts examined his obsession, the meticulous nature of his planning, and his ability to maintain normalcy for nearly 2 decades. Psychologists debated the role of social camouflage, community perception, and personal charisma in facilitating such crimes, contributing to research that would inform both law enforcement and behavioral studies. His life, once intertwined with ordinary routines, now existed only as a cautionary example, a case study in manipulation and concealment. Despite the darkness, the town of Mason began to embrace healing and restoration. Schools and libraries named programs in Caroline's honor, celebrating her curiosity, intelligence, and spirit. Scholarships, mentorship programs, and community service initiatives flourished, turning her memory into an ongoing source of inspiration. The Mitchell family became advocates for cold case resolution, speaking at national conferences about persistence, evidence preservation, and the emotional importance of closure for families of victims. In quiet moments, Laura would walk along Cedar Lane, now lined with newly planted trees and small plaques honoring Caroline. She sometimes imagined her daughter walking beside her, laughing and teasing Jacob as she had done years ago. Each step along the familiar path felt like a reclamation of lost time, a subtle victory over fear, silence, and injustice. Jacob often joined her, and together they shared memories, stories, and dreams, allowing Caroline's presence to guide them even as they moved forward. Detective Sanders occasionally revisited the old case files, a reminder of the diligence that had paid off. She reflected on the long hours, the frustration of dead ends, and the satisfaction of connecting the smallest clues to build a narrative of truth. The case reinforced her belief that no detail, however insignificant it may seem, should ever be ignored. Every piece of evidence, every witness account, every fragment of memory had contributed to finally bringing Caroline's story to light. In the years that followed, Mason continued to honor Caroline. Anniversaries of her disappearance were marked with community gatherings, candlelight vigils, and reflections on the progress made in forensic science and public awareness. Her story became embedded in the town's collective consciousness, serving as a reminder of both vulnerability and resilience. Residents took comfort in the knowledge that while tragedy had struck, justice had ultimately prevailed. For Laura and Jacob, life was not the same as before 2002, but it had been reclaimed in a meaningful way. Caroline's voice, her laughter, and her aspirations remained alive in the initiatives named for her, in the memories shared with friends and neighbors, and in the sense of closure achieved through Whitmore's conviction. They had endured grief, uncertainty, and fear for 17 years, and now, with the truth revealed, they could begin to embrace life again without the weight of unresolved injustice pressing upon them. The case of Caroline Mitchell became a story told beyond Mason, a testament to perseverance, modern forensic science, and the unwavering determination of families and investigators alike. It highlighted the importance of vigilance, the value of evidence preservation, and the profound human impact of cold cases resolved. Each twist, every discovery, and the eventual confession and conviction of Whitmore reinforced that justice, though delayed, could not be denied indefinitely. Even as the leaves turned once more along Cedar Lane, the shadow of 2002 lingered faintly, not as a source of fear, but as a memory transformed into strength. Mason had confronted betrayal, deception, and loss, emerging with renewed commitment to community, truth, and remembrance. Caroline's story, once lost in the shadows of time, had finally been illuminated in full. It would endure, not only as a reminder of what had been taken, but as a celebration of the courage, persistence, and love that had restored it. In every courtroom echo, every planted tree, and every whispered story shared among the townspeople, Caroline's presence remained undeniable. The darkness of 17 years had been pierced by light, the revelation of truth, the triumph of justice, and the unwavering remembrance of a girl whose life, though tragically cut short, had ultimately reshaped an entire community.